Hello. We are the Group 2. We will be presenting The Isolation of the Philippines and the Japanese Landings, written by Louis C. Morton. We will be discussing the following. The author, First Days of War, the First Landings, the Impact of War, the Main Landings, and Strategy and Logistics.
Louis Morton was born in New York City, received his MA from New York University in 1906, and his doctorate from Duke University in 1938 in the field of American colonial history. Professor Morton was a writer, editor, teacher, and administrator. He taught at City College of New York from 1939 to 1941. He served in the U.S. Army from 1942 to 1946 and was Deputy Chief Historian in the Office of the Chief of Military History, Washington, D.C. from 1946 to 1959. Louis Morton directed and supervised preparation of the 12-volume series on the War in the Pacific in the official U.S. Army in the World War II history. He is a lieutenant colonel in the Army Reserve. He served as a consultant and lecturer at a number of military and civilian institutions. In 1971 to 1972, he served as provost and also he was a president of the New England Historical Association from 1968 to 1969. He also author, co-author, and editor of books regarded as one of America's foremost experts on the history of World War II. He is best known for The Fall of the Philippines, 1953, The War in the Pacific Strategy and Command, 1962, and Writings on the World War II, 1967. And he was general editor of a 17-volume study, Wars, Military Institutions of the United States, 1963.
First Days of War, 7th December 1941. Pearl Harbor bombing, cutting communications between Hawaii and the Philippines. 8th December 1941, the day which will live in infamy. The Japanese naval and air forces struck almost simultaneously at Kota Baru in British Malaya, Singapore, Singapore, Guam, Hong Kong, Wake Islands, and the Philippines. 13th December 1941, the Japanese forces possessed Kowloon. 25th December 1941, the Japanese forces possessed Hong Kong. Communication lines between Hawaii and the Philippines were cut. The Japanese attack on Pearl Harbor had destroyed the battle force of the Pacific Fleet and nullified all plans to come to the aid of the Philippines. At 7:50 a.m., while Pearl Harbor was still asleep in the morning mist, Japanese planes came in over the island. 5 minutes later, just an hour before Nomura presented his government's reply to Mr. Hull, they dropped their first bombs. The Japanese sank 3 battleships, capsizing 1 and damaging for more. In addition, 3 light cruisers, 3 destroyers, and miscellaneous vessels were badly damaged. The American casualties for the day were 2,280 men killed and 1,109 wounded. The Japanese only lost 29 aircraft and 5 midget submarines. The Japanese made obsolete the carefully prepared plans of defense in the event of war in the Pacific. The Rainbow Plan called for the progressive movement of the Pacific by the capture of the Caroline and Marshall Islands and the establishment of an advanced base at Truk. The attack. Japanese Army bombers were reported by the Aircraft Warning Service on Luzon to be heading south over Lingayen Gulf in the direction of Manila. The fog, which had grounded the 11th Air Fleet, had lifted to the east at dawn, permitting 25 twin-engine Army bombers to take off for Luzon. One group struck to Gagaro at about 9:30 a.m., while another concentrated on barracks and other installations at Baguio, the summer capital of the Philippines, where Quezon was staying at this time. The Japanese bombers returned to base without having sighted any American aircraft, first in the Cagayan Valley, and then turned around and proceeding north, apparently referring to these Japanese Army planes. The 11th Air Fleet's attack against Clark was even more successful than the worried Japanese had expected. The first flights of bombers had concentrated on the hangars, barracks, and warehouses and left them a burning ruin. Casualties in men were 55 killed and more than 100 wounded. After 1 day of war, with its strength cut in half, The Far East Air Force had been eliminated as an effective fighting force.
The fleet moved to south. The mission of the Asiatic fleet in the event of war was to support the defense of the Philippines. As long as the defense continues, the actual employment of local naval defense forces was entrusted to the commander of the 60th Naval District, who 5 destroyers, 2 of which were under repair and 3 on the patrol, 27 submarines with their 3 tenders, 3 of the underwater craft. The bulk of the surface strength of the Asiatic fleet, organized into Task Force 5, was based south of Manila Bay. December 4, when the light cruiser Boys, which belonged to Pacific Fleet, was also in the Visayas of Cebu, where she had gone after her arrival in Manila with an armed convoy. The remaining 2 submarines of the Asiatic fleet were on patrol of the Luzon coast, one in Lingayen Gulf and other in Sorsogon Bay, patrolling to the south and linking up with the Dutch patrols. From Borneo were 2 small aircraft detachments.
The Japanese gained air and naval supremacy. After the Japanese followed up their success during first day of the war with a series of air attacks aimed at destroying American air naval power from the Philippines. Before dawn, at 9, 7 Japanese naval bombers struck a Nicholas Field near in Manila. The Japanese had planned a larger attack, but a fog had gained control over the Formosa during early morning. The air attack against Formosa, which General MacArthur promised for the night, never materialized. At 8:00, one of the B-17 took off from the Clark Field to take a photo reconnaissance over Formosa, but forced to back because of mechanical difficulty. On the 9th, 13 of heavy bombers on Mindanao moved to Luzon. 6 of the flying fortress landed elevated at Clark Field. The Japanese attacked on 10th December 1941 at Nicholas Field at Cavite Navy Yard. The Japanese took off and about to strike again at 10:00 at Luzon, and this time the target is Manila Bay. The Japanese hit at Del Carmen Field, Nicholas and Nelson Field near in Manila. After that, Japanese troops flew over Cavite to attack. They attacked ships and small craft. The rest attacked the naval base over Cavite, dropping their bombs from the height of 20,000 feet at the first run, and 27 bombers completed their attack against the ship. Admiral Hartas told the shipmasters on the 11th that their vessel would be safer in Visayan ports, and at the evening, the vessel began to move out to the Manila Bay. The remaining supplies were to be distributed at Manila Corregidor at Mariveles. 63 naval bombers from Tacao and Formosa arrived at Central Luzon at 11:30 and 12:00 and struck Iba and Clarkfield. MacArthur reported that the enemy's air strength is rapidly rising. Pilots ordered to avoid direct combat, to show off the strength and have an air observation. The first attack came at dawn at Del Carmen. 10:30 at 11:00, Clarkfield was attacked the same time with the Baguio and Tarlac were hit.
The first landings. The Japanese did not wait for the destruction of American air and naval forces to begin landings in the Philippine archipelago. Hours before, the first Japanese plane had taken off to attack targets in the Philippine Islands. 3 task forces had sailed south from Formosa ports under cover of darkness on the evening of 7th December. Their destination was the Philippine Islands. 2 were to land on northern Luzon, and the 3rd was headed for the tiny island of Bataan, about 150 miles to the north. The forces assigned to these landings were small, even for such limited objectives. But to secure so many detachments for advanced landings, General Homa had to weaken seriously the 2 combat divisions Imperial General Headquarters had allotted to him for the Philippine invasion. The timetable for invasion was a complicated one and could easily be upset by any unexpected event. Bataan Island. The first Japanese invaders on Philippine soil went ashore on Bataan Island in Luzon Strait, midway between Formosa and Luzon at dawn 8 December. The invasion force, which had left the Formosa ports of Tacau and Hozan on the evening of the 7th, consisted of 2 transports escorted by 1 destroyer, 4 torpedo boats, and a large number of another small vessels. Aboard the transports was a naval combat unit of 490 men as well as air corps troops who were to establish an air base on the island. The combat troops quickly seized the airfield near Basco, and the Air Force troops came ashore to inspect the field. When the success of the attack on Clark Field became known, the Japanese discontinued work on the Bataan Island field. Such a base was now unnecessary. Early on the morning of the 10th, the men of the 3D Gunboat Division, part of the Bataan Attack Force, seized Camiguin Island to the south. A seaplane base was immediately established on the island by the Naval Base Force, thus providing the Japanese with an air base on 35 miles north of Apari.
The landings on North Luzon, Apari, and Vigan were both on the next Japanese timetable for invasion. The most direct route from Manila to Apari along Route 5 through the pass was 275 miles long. Vigan, the capital of Ilocos Sur Province, is 220 miles north of Manila on Route 3.
The landings at Apari and Gonzaga. In the first light of dawn, the men of the Tanaka detachment began to transfer from the transport to the landing craft. At December 10th, General Wainwright, the North Luzon Force Commander, first heard of the Apari landing, this time estimated as a reinforced brigade of 3,000 men, while he was inspecting the beach defenses of the 11th and 21st Division at Lingayen Gulf. The Tanaka detachment was ashore and in Apari by 1,300 when it reported the capture of the airfield. In Apari, it was joined by the 2 companies that had landed there earlier.
Kano Detachment's reception promised to be a warm one. December 20th, Tanaka and Kano detachments had joined and were ready to move south toward Lingayen Gulf. December 17th, 5th Air Group planned to operate mainly from Luzon bases.
The civilian population and the untrained Filipino soldiers were ill-prepared to withstand the initial shock without displaying signs of nervousness and apprehension. The Filipinos saw danger everywhere, and their fertile imagination produced reports of enemy activity that kept the USAFFE staff busy searching for the grain of truth in the wild tales that came in over the wires. The Japanese were supposed to have sailed into Manila Bay and put ashore 1,000 men at the mouth of the Pasig River. From 9 December on, Admiral Hart wrote, "An extraordinary crop of incorrect enemy information flowed in over the warning net. Too many reports came in of enemy sightings when nothing actually was sighted." The army, said one writer, was traveling as much on rumors as on its stomach. Each fresh rumor made the civilian population more uneasy. No one knew what to believe. Numerous air raid alarms, all of them false, and the blackout added to the tense and foreboding atmosphere. The air alarms in Manila became so frequent that General Sutherland had to order wardens to clear through the army headquarters before sounding the sirens. The blackout was rigorously enforced, and the criminal element in the city took full advantage of the darkness and confusion. Shop windows were covered with adhesive tape and entrances barricaded with sandbags. Transportation was commandeered by the army and gasoline was rationed. Those who drove cars had to shade their headlights in the approved fashion. The Commonwealth Assembly met in emergency session and made available to President Quezon the sum of 20 million pesos for defense. The United States contributed an equal sum for civilian relief. Government employees were given 3 months advance in pay so that they could move their families out of the city to places supposedly safer than Manila. It never became necessary to establish martial law, and after a week or two, the Filipinos quieted down and life in the capital became more normal. The troops were just as nervous as the civilians. Most of them were convinced that a well-organized Japanese fifth column existed in the Philippines.
Consolidating the Lingayen beachhead, while his troops at Lingayen were pushing ahead, General Homa remained aboard ship in Lingayen Gulf. He had done all he could in the planning and preparation for the invasion. The landing had been made in a narrow corridor crossed by numerous streams, each of which afforded the defender an opportunity for delaying action. Although the plain to the south provided an excellent route to Manila, it could also be used by the Americans and Filipinos as the base for a concerted counterattack against the Japanese as they stream out of the corridor. Dalaman Bay Organization and preparation. The Dalaman Bay Force had a secondary role in the seizure of Luzon and was consequently much smaller than Lingayen Force. The original objective had been Batangas Bay on the southwest coast of Luzon, where the beaches were suitable for landings and where a direct route led through favorable terrain toward Manila to the north.
The basic strategy of the war established during stop talks with British between January and March 1941 and embodied in the Rainbow Plan. This strategy provided that the principal effort of the Allies would be made against Germany and the decisive theater would be in Atlantic and Europe. Army planners shared the Navy's pessimism about the fate of the Philippines, and on December 9 had been as anxious as the Navy members of the Joint Board to bring back the Pensacola convoy. MacArthur urged upon the War Department an offensive strategy in Far East. The master stroke he had in mind was a strong air attack against the Japanese home islands from the north. MacArthur suggested offensive against Japan month later. After the meeting on December 13, MacArthur asked Hart to escort the Pensacola convoy to Manila. MacArthur's solution was to concentrate the resources of the Allies against Japan and so reverse the basic strategic decision of the war. The final answer to MacArthur's plea for a reversal of strategy and the concentration of Allied resources in the Far East was provided by the first of the wartime U.S.-British conferences held in Washington between December 24 and January 14.
The Pensacola Convoy. The decision to bolster the Philippines was made on the first day of conflict. When the Japanese began hostilities, a convoy of 7 ships escorted by the heavy cruiser Pensacola and the sub-chaser Niagara was already on the high seas in the South Pacific. The convoy was immediately ordered to dock at Suba in the PG Islands until a decision could be made regarding its final destination. General Guerrero and Lair added, Richard K. Turner, the Army and Navy staff planners, wanted the convoy to be rushed back to Hawaii, right away to bolster the severely devastated garrison. The Joint Board agreed to recall the Pensacola convoy to Hawaii after some deliberation. On December 13, General MacArthur received the good news that reinforcements were on their way. He immediately discussed the prospect of escorting the ships from Brisbane to Manila with Admiral Hart. The Pensacola convoy arrived at Brisbane on December 20 with its brightest cargo of aircraft, artillery, and ammunition. The first stage of the voyage had been finished, but it was still a long distance from Manila.
The base in Australia. Brigadier General Dwight D. Eisenhower was assigned by General Marshall to supervise the establishment of an advanced American base in Australia. December 12, Eisenhower was called to Washington and reported to General Marshall after 2 days. Pensacola convoy was routed to Brisbane and it was decided to support General MacArthur. American effort in the Southwest Pacific turned to the build-up of supplies in Australia and the establishment of a line of communications northward. Barnes, when he arrived in Brisbane, was to relieve Brigadier General Henry B. Claggett, then commanding the Interceptor Command in the Philippines. On the other hand, Major General George H. Brett was to command the base to be known as the U.S. Army Forces in Australia. He was informed that his command was to be considered as the advanced base of communications zone for the support of the USAFFE, and that he would operate under the orders of General MacArthur. Colonel Stephen J. Chamberlain, a highly qualified G4 officer on duty with General Staff, was sent to Australia to serve as Brett's Chief of Staff. December 24th, General Brereton was called to General MacArthur's office and told that he was to go to Australia with his headquarters to organize advanced operating bases from which he can protect the lines of operation, secure bases in Mindanao, and support the defense of the Philippines. December 27th, General MacArthur summed his situation as follows. First, enemy penetration in the Philippines resulted from our weakness on the sea and the air. Second, surface elements of the Asiatic fleet were withdrawn and the effect of the submarines has been negligible. Third, lack of airfields and modern planes prevented defensive dispersion, and lack of pursuit planes permitted unhindered day bombardment. And fourth, the enemy has had an utter freedom of naval and air movements.
Contribution and relevance.
With this document, readers are given the chance to know what happened before, during, and after the war against the Japanese forces. Readers are able to know the details of how the Philippines, with the help of the United States, strategized for the attacks from the Japanese forces. Thank you for watching.